Hello and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Zoe Hawkins, and my friend and co-host Jo Wheatley.
Hi, everybody. Today we are talking to you about coaching contradictions. And we're talking to you about this because I thought A, it might be a little bit provocative, B, it's really interesting, and C, sometimes when people see contradictions, it can be really confusing. And of course, this podcast is here to help to demystify coaching and make it accessible to people, both in terms of knowledge, but also in terms of training. So, we're going to cover a few of the contradictions that whether you're learning to be a coach now or you're thinking about coaching might come up so that it stimulates your understanding of these topics. And we'll talk about how you develop as a coach along that pathway from beginning to train as a coach through to coaching mastery and how your understanding of these different things might change along that journey.
Mm. And I think one of the places to start with that makes sense is around goals, because goals come at the start of coaching. So therefore, we should talk about goals at the start. And when well, as many of you listeners will know, we train people to be coaches, and we have CPD programs where people who are already trained come to learn deeper skills around coaching, particularly on our emotions coaching practitioner training. And it's on that where we often get into a discussion around goals, because what you're taught on a coaching training program is that you mustn't continue coaching until you've got a very clear goal with your client. And that clear goal needs to have a clear outcome. So, what is it that the client wants to achieve by the end of your coaching session? Why is that important to them? And making sure that you and the client are aligned before you move forward. However, the contradiction is that often people are coming to coaching because they don't have that clarity. Like, they don't know what they want. They don't really know what they want to achieve by the end of the session. And they're coming because they know that they need to move forward and they want to get unstuck, and they just want things to be different. But if they can't see how it's going to be different, your role as the coach is to enable them to build the clarity. So the goal almost becomes about clarity. And the other contradiction is often the goal comes at the end of a coaching session, because you can spend your time unpicking and deepening and exploring to a point that at the end of the session, the client becomes clear on what they want and need. So, we're coach trainers. We sit at that end where we do talk about how important the goal is, but also as trainers in CPD, we know that there is also a reality that exists in this contradiction around goals. What would you say about that, Jo?
Coaching really is all about supporting or working in that space in the middle. And it's really important to have the skills to be able to support the client to get clarity on what they want out of coaching. And that may well start with they're coming with a big goal, a goal that actually, as a coach, when you hear it, you think, well, there's like six layers before that, that's way out in 5 years' time. Let's work on breaking that down so it feels more manageable for you, and maybe that's a blocker for the client. But it also might be that, as you say, that the client isn't sure what they want, and that's what they're bringing. Their goal really is to figure out what they want. So the goal is to identify the goal, and both of those things are valid and important and interesting and worthwhile. And so having the skills and the flexibility to be able to support and enable a conversation at either end of the spectrum there is really important. And that's why people come and train to be coaches, to be able to, well, firstly, I think to understand, like, is it okay? That's to do this. Is it okay to do that? There's a lot of reassurance, that you can get. And then also the skills as to how to develop that. Because if somebody is coming saying, I don't know what I want, and I've never had coaching before. I think coaching is about this. Can I do this? Can I do that? And actually, it's learning to start with the relationship. That's the other thing, is you could dive straight into, help, 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 rather than working on the relationship, and also learning about some of those deeper, more revealing, more unfolding questions that are going to be 10 times more valuable to the client, but they'll need that
Mm.
relationship there. So those are the things that you learn. And absolutely, it is we're calling them contradictions. You can call them juxtapositions. You can call them tension that you hold. But yes, and it's something that you need to be able to work with and welcome into the coaching space. I think following on from that is the messaging around coaching is non-directive. And you might sometimes hear people say, like, when people seek to explain, sometimes it's easier to, say things that are exclusive and say, well, coaching is at this end of the scale and mentoring is at this end of the scale. Mentoring is more directive, coaching is more non-directive. Of course, it is not as simple as that, but sometimes that's the starting point, for learning. And yes, it's important to be able to be non-directive. Yes, it can be important and useful to focus on your role as the coach around asking questions. And sometimes a client it's just blocked in their thinking, and they may be overwhelmed or cognitively overloaded by a feeling that they're being bombarded with questions, and they perhaps feel that they don't have the processing time. So if you were completely non-directive, that's one experience that a client might have sometimes in a coaching session. So that's obviously coupled with being able to hold space for reflection. Sometimes it's useful to be a bit more directive, or suggestive. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, say?
Well, I think it's about conscious choice.
Mm.
That's what was coming to my mind. Now, the reason why you're taught that coaching is non-directive is because 99% of people who come to coaching coach in a directive way, unconsciously. And what that does typically is it undermines the client. Like it squashes the client's own creativity. It squashes the client's own ability to find the answers. So when you coach predominantly in a non-directive way, because you're bringing habits, in the workplace, we give advice, we give guidance to friends, we give counsel, we suggest ideas. It doesn't give space for their own voice. So much of coaching training is unlearning unconscious habits. And then you relearn how to do something almost to the extreme. And then when you know that you can choose when the right time is to answer a client's question around what do you think, you're able to understand the moment of if I answer this client's question now, will that empower them or will it disempower them? Are they asking me because they are uncertain of their own voice and opinions? Are they asking me because they lack self-confidence and self-doubt? Or are they asking me because they're stuck and they just really need some help? And it's the ability to be able to know in the moment or reflect in the moment and make choices in the moment consciously based on the relationship that you're in. So it's about not being directive by default or not being non-directive by default, but being able to almost have that space to dance in the relationship and work out together like what is a way to be. I'm not sure if I answered your question there, Jay, but that's just what was on my mind as you were talking there. It was really important about this thing around conscious choice. And I think that is connected to another contradiction, which is about how much you share of yourself in the coaching relationship. So we are taught your own experiences don't matter. You are there for the coach. Their life is not your life. It actually isn't relevant if you are having a similar experience to what your coachee is having, because it's really important you take yourself out. If you're coaching somebody who is a CEO and you haven't been a CEO yourself, that's fine, because it's about the skill of the coaching. You don't have to have been a CEO in order to coach a CEO. All true. And sometimes it can be really helpful to share. So, one example might be if you're working with a client and they are neurodivergent and they share that they are ADHD and autistic, and they have lots of lived experience they're going to bring into the session. And let's say you are autistic, ADHD, or neurodivergent in some way. It could be helpful if you share. I am also neurodivergent. You may see me stimming in the session. You may see me doing these things that can help to create safety, belonging, normalization. So there are times when sharing self can be important, but again, it's about consciously knowing and choosing, if I share or if I don't share, what will that do or not do to the coaching relationship? And you're not necessarily always going to get that right. And maybe there isn't a right or wrong answer. And that could be a contradiction in itself. Um, I think what we're saying is hard and fast rules don't really exist in any profession.
The end.
Well, actually, as I said that, I was like, they probably do. Actually, when it comes to things like health and safety, I reckon there are some hard and fast rules. So I might just take that bit back.
I think you're blending like the the messaging that people get that coaching is distinct because it is non-directive. So as a form of interaction with another person, that's one way in which it is different to an everyday conversation. And we were given some of the ands, maybes sometimes. And also then you're blending into the messaging that you get, which is you do not share yourself, you do not make self-disclosures. And what we're saying is actually that's there's always a depends, and it isn't, again, it isn't like when we say, sometimes it can be helpful, it's like not for that client every time, not for every client. It really is in that it really depends on the relationship and the client and the topic and the relationship and so on. So and that's the fascinating thing. That's what keeps us fascinated, working with clients is I just love how different it is. And I was thinking as you were talking about like the support that I'm looking for at the moment. So start off thinking, oh, I want to get a new supervisor, coaching supervisor. What do I want? What else do I need? I don't really want a pure supervisor. I want somebody that's going to receive me as a whole person and engage with me as their whole person and have a real relationship. And I had a conversation with somebody recently who sees the world in that sense in a similar way to me, without these hard and fast boundaries around it, and thinking about supervision, coaching supervision kind of space as being like a conversation where you are able to go much deeper. You're able to really on all topics. So I don't need to compartmentalize different parts of my life and have different people that I would go and speak to about different things if I wanted to. And I felt like, so refreshing. Yes, that's how I see it. And I respect the fact that that person is bringing competence and expertise in a range of different areas so that they are able to hold a conversation for me in that way. So, and we often talk about, when you read about coaching, it's like coaching is this, counseling is this, and, consultancy is this. And we're like, it can be, yes, you need to operate within your the boundaries of your competence. But when we talk about beliefs, beliefs are formed in the past. And so we are reflecting on that. And clients will bring things from the past. So coaching isn't only about the future. I think that's another contradiction that coaches can find challenging, especially when they are thinking about how am I going to describe coaching to friends, family, clients who haven't had coaching before, but that are drawn to coaching in some way.
Mm. And I think the irony there, as you were describing who you're working with and what you were looking for, is there'll be loads of supervisors listening to this being, well, that's exactly the space that I hold as a supervisor. It is bundled with contradictions. And I sort of sat here reflecting, gosh, if you've got somebody who's thinking of becoming a coach listening to this thing, well, how am I ever going to learn how to coach if you're saying that it's this, but it's also not this, and it's that, and it's also not that? And the reality is, with any profession, it's evolution, isn't it? So when you start coaching, it's a bit like driving a car. Like, you have to learn the rules of the road. You have to learn how to drive safely and ethically. And then once you do that, if you take a corner too fast, you're able to like correct yourself, and there are things in coaching that, just as you develop and learn and get more experience and practice, and you do more CPD and you work with different types of clients, your evolution as a coach changes. Like, the coach that I was in training is not the same coach that I was when I started working with, lots of leaders and organizations. And the coach that I am today is not the coach that I was even 3 or 4 years ago. I'm much more now relaxed in my style of coaching. I drop some of the rules, and I, have my own flexibility and style, still working within the boundaries of ethics. And I think that's the same for many professions. When you start out, you have an idea of what it's going to look like and you work hard to adhere to things, but you're going to grow and evolve, not really in just your profession, but I'm not the same person that I was 5 or 10 years ago. So, coaching is so much a reflection of who you are. Like who you are is how you coach. So the more you grow and evolve, the more of that you will also pass into your skills as a practitioner.
And I suppose that draws me to think about the coaching bodies and how there are different coaching bodies. What we mean by coaching bodies is organizations that are set up to set out the standards, like what is it to be a good coach and an ethical coach. And three of the main bodies, if you take the UK where we're based, are the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, the ICF, the International Coach Federation, and the Association for Coaching. And if you go onto their websites, you'll see that they have different competency frameworks and different competency frameworks for different levels of coaching. So even within that, you would be looking at least nine slightly different competency frameworks. And so it's important to understand what is the style of coaching that each of those coaching bodies see as being the most ethical or the right way of coaching, which again is interesting given that coaching is all about growth. So even having frameworks that are static, certainly for a period of time by nature, it is really interesting. And the narrative that coaching is evolving and changing, and yet the competency frameworks again stay quite static. And there's a lot of challenge around those at the moment, but they do, at least it's helpful to have them because it's a useful reference point when you're kind of going into this sea of coaching and you're thinking, is this coaching or isn't that? I remember when I was first training, I'm like, how much of this is what I already do and how much of this is new, and trying to figure out then, so am I coaching here or aren't I? And I think this goes hand in hand if we take models, coaching models as an example. So we know that when people come on coaching training, the majority of them are desperate for models, structures, like give it to me. That's how I'm going to coach. And if I've got that and I could do that, then I feel like I'm coaching. And they can be really helpful in conversations with clients. Helpful if you share with your client, transparent around them. Some clients will love that. Other clients won't want to feel that you're coaching them using models. And so that could really put them off. But what happens for a lot of coaches is as they develop their own style and confidence and understanding of coaching, the models are what they draw from and the knowledge of them, and they will be able to consciously and unconsciously, they will come out in some ways through the questions that are asked and the way that conversations are facilitated, sometimes in sharing provocations, new perspectives, like something to bounce off. But they won't be as rigid, if you like, in that, and won't be so worried about time and how much time will it take to go through a whole model. And so on our CPD programs, we're very clear that we aren't purist coaches. We will teach you and give you models and structure because we know it can be really helpful in the early part of your journey around different aspects of coaching. And on all of our programs, we support and encourage and welcome the debates around each of these things, because that's where, like, in that discomfort and that curiosity and the questioning, the learning deepens. And really, it's for you as the coach to find your understanding of these things. And again, that's what makes it such a rich and diverse profession, because it means that each coachee, there are a number of different coaches that could be a great fit for them. I won't be the most effective coach for every person that wants to have coaching, and that's great. I love that we are all so different, because when I'm looking for a coach, I know there's a whole range of different coaches to choose from.
I remember when we did a lot of facilitation on our programs, we've now got a great team of facilitators who do that. And we would be in observing coaching practice. It would be early on and they'd have a activity to follow. And there'll be those people who stick to the script. Like they all they do is ask the questions that are on the handout. And then there'll be those learners it's like they didn't even have a script. Like they're just like, they might ask the first question, they go way off into a rabbit hole. And the feedback we give to the person who sticks to the script is like, you bring some more of yourself in, think about how you would summarize and how you would sort of link the questions together. And then the person who didn't stick to the script were like, stick to the script. Like right now, where you're at in your coaching evolution, stick to the script. Then by the end of the training, when you've got the person who did go off down a rabbit hole, is using a coaching activity and they're really rigid with the coaching activity, then we give them feedback like, now's the time that you can like deviate from the structure and be more semi-structured, because you've now got the skills to be able to hold it and back up your intuition. So you can see like it isn't about ebbing and flowing, it's about having the journey. But you absolutely do have to have the foundational skills in place to be able to be more fluid and dance. So that's why there are these contradictions in the coaching space.
And for me, a critical part of, with taking models or any question, if we take the models though, is what we work on with people on our training is we say the most important thing is that you understand the purpose of the question. So when you look at, the semi-structure that we might give, client, we're able to explain why that question is there, why it's linked to the next question, what the purpose is for the client, which type of clients and which type of coaching topics this particular activity could be helpful with, and how it might link to other things that we are teaching on the program, and where it could be really helpful to do, where and when the best thing you can do is to pause and to deviate like at that point, and what are the types of scenarios that we've experienced or other people might have experienced as to where that could be really helpful, and being able to draw on real client experiences to be able to bring that to life. And that's the really, coaching training is all about learning about contradictions
Well, and
in
I
many,
think
many
it's
ways.
about coaching mastery is really recognizing there's no one way to be a great coach, because the coach that is rigid, that sticks to goal, reality, options, way forward, for example, or the goal, the coach that really focuses in on helping somebody move from where they are now to where they want to be and not really deviating into the past. The coaching isn't therapeutical, still very highly effective for many, many people. And for many people, they will be an amazing, excellent coach. Coaches at the other end who are more fluid, semi-structured, relaxed, a bit like the person you described, that doesn't really sit in coaching, but doesn't really sit in mentoring, like just doesn't really sit in supervision, is just there for the whole person. Amazing, excellent, highly skilled professional for some clients as well. So coaching has contradictions because it's there are unique styles within coaching. Ultimately, you have to be ethical. You have to have highly tuned skills to be able to do coaching well. And when you come through coaching training and CPD programs, you navigate those contradictions. You learn and make sense of them because of the skills that you're developing as a practitioner.
And as a coach, ultimately, when you're supporting clients are bringing contradictions, and that will be in the form of part of me feels like this and part of me feels like that. And so, therefore, I'm not sure whether to do this or that. And that's what's brought me to coaching. So, your role as a coach is often to support clients to hold and figure out a way through the contradictions that they're experiencing. So maybe we should say, if you want clarity around contradictions, or you've listened to this and thought, yeah, totally, like either that's my experience, of training to be a coach, that's the journey that I've been on and I'm like making sense of it, or you're thinking, yeah, when I've looked into coaching, like some of it resonates with me, but some of it doesn't. Maybe we've helped to explain the reason why you might be having that experience. But ultimately, if you want to learn more about how to be a coach and learn more about the things we've been talking about, come and join our coaching training, and you can find out more about that by doing our quiz, which is mycoachingcourse.com. And if you've already got all of this cracked, we'd love it if you took a moment to like or subscribe or review the podcast. And we look forward to seeing you next time.